All right, welcome. Thank you for joining us for the second annual Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. My name is Chelsea Ross. I'm a Deputy Director here at the Partnership for Strong Communities. This year, Partnership for Strong Communities is hosting 3 full days of sessions featuring local, state, and national experts who are leading conversations that explore the challenges, share best practices, and coalesce us around critical next steps to address key affordable housing issues in our state. Please join the conversation at hashtag CAHC 2021 on Twitter and follow us at PSC Housing if you aren't already. This session is entitled Affordable Housing Opportunities from Pandemic Impacted Commercial Real Estate. And before we turn it over to our presenters, I'd like to thank some of our sponsors, our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and the Melville Charitable Trust. Their support has allowed us to repeat the conference again this year. And thank you to our collaborating sponsors, the Connecticut Department of Housing, Webster Bank, and Rockport Mortgage. We also have a bunch of supporting sponsors that have helped make this conference happen, including Beacon Communities, who you'll hear from a couple folks from there today, Capital for Change, Corporation for Supportive Housing, Elm City Communities, Fairfield County's Community Foundation, Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, JHM Group, LISC, National Equity Fund, and Trinity Financial. Lastly, a big thank you to Beacon for making this session possible and for their sponsorship. A few quick housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. We'll make all recordings available to conference attendees as soon as possible. This session may also be broadcast on CTN. All participants have been entered muted. Please remain on mute unless a speaker asks you to unmute. And if you have a technology issue, please select the chat icon in the Zoom control panel and send the chat to PSC Zoom Meetings Chelsea Ross, and I will do my best to assist you. And your presenters today will let you know when they'd like to take questions and how to submit those. With that, I will turn it over to April to get us started. April?
Great, thanks, Chelsea. I'm gonna share my screen really quickly. Thank you guys for joining us. So we are going to use this lunchtime panel to talk about what it means to create new affordable housing in the current market conditions. So in the midst of a really hurt commercial market, what that might mean for affordable housing development. We're going to integrate the perspective of the developer. We're going to talk a little bit from the public or more planning perspective, and then also the design perspective. And I'll let each of us kind of introduce ourselves as we move through. If I can scroll. Okay. So Gina Martinez and myself are both developers at Beacon Communities. So Beacon Communities is a mission-driven developer. We have 150 properties across Connecticut, the District of Columbia, and 12 other states. And we have a wide-ranging portfolio, but we really focus on affordable housing development. And our pipeline has kind of a growing mixed use and affordable, like historic preservation focus, both of which are relevant to today's presentation. So I will let Michael talk a little bit about his organization.
Capital Region Development Authority is dedicated to the Hartford region. It's a statutorily created quasi-state agency. Our funding comes in multiple ways. Primarily, it's subordinated financing, but we also do equity placements and tripwire, if you will, other possible sources. We are not an affordable housing agency per se, though our portfolio is about 80% market, 20% affordable. Again, our focus is downtown Hartford, but increasingly we're working through the neighborhoods and have been doing a lot of conversion of properties from one use to residential.
All right, and Monique from the design perspective.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monique Hall with BSC Group. So BSC Group is a multidisciplinary design and engineering firm with offices across the 3 of the New England states. We're a group of planners and landscape architects, engineers and ecologists, as well as GIS software designers. So we say our mission is to use design, engineering, science, and technology to build, support, and connect with our communities.
Awesome. Great. So that's who we are, and sort of want to return the favor. You can approach this topic from so many different ways. We want to know who we're talking to. So if I can successfully do my first Zoom poll, the planners are the fastest. I'll give you a couple seconds. to have, I don't know, identify yourself in the best way possible, given this very broad industry. All right, see about half of you aren't eating your lunch actively. All right, so I'm going to end the poll here. We've got a lot in the other category. I'm sorry, I did not include you as part of the multiple choice. A lot of planners, a couple developers, actually pretty evenly spread across, and no one from the design perspective. So Monique, you can do a lot of teaching on your section. All right, very helpful to know. And as kind of another baseline setting question, and also kind of testing to see how this open format works, we're curious what you think about when you hear the phrase pandemic impacted real estate. What does that mean? What are you seeing in the market? If anyone is so bold, you can unmute yourself and share what you're seeing, or feel free to just type in the chat. So think about, in the residential market, what are you sort of seeing in the area where you're working?
Be bold.
Be bold. We'll see if we have a shy group. Hello.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm here as an advocate because I'm a case manager for homeless and runaway youth, but I'm also here on my behalf because I have experienced homelessness as well as unstably housed for almost 6 years. What I have experienced with real estate, as far as residential and when I was looking for an apartment, was that when I went through the real estate company, they asked me for based on my credit score, they said I would need a co-signer, not just a co-signer who was a homeowner and had good credit to even be considered for an apartment. And I had never heard of that before. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not buying a house. I'm trying to get an apartment. And that's what I was met with.
Sorry. Yeah, definitely more sort of stringent landlords, more kind of risk aversion in terms of renting. The single family home market really sort of went very haywire. It was hard to get in a number of suburban areas, and a huge increase in rent burden on the residential side. Carol, did you want to jump in?
Sure, thanks. I'm in Fairfield County, operating the Fairfield and Westport Housing Authorities, and we're losing, at least in Fairfield, which used to be a very robust rental market. We're seeing a vast migration from White Plains, Westchester County, and New York City coming into Fairfield County, and folks are flipping, taking rental real estate, and they're now becoming owner occupied. And many folks are showing up with a cash, with cash to, purchase. So, things are selling way above, what the asking price for is. And obviously the concern for the housing authority and all the folks we enjoy serving, without landlords, my housing choice voucher program just doesn't work. And so this has been a really crazy time. And at least from everything that I've read from some of the larger real estate and marketing firms is, they're talking, we're going to see this go right through 2022, which honestly, is deeply concerning to, the work we do. Thanks.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, as you're highlighting kind of the geography of where the affordable housing pressures are, there's a ton of towns and cities that just have these huge kind of shocks in terms of skyrocketing housing costs. And at the same time, employment and income is harder to find for a lot of people. So on the sort of personal household level, rent burden is hugely increasing. So that's kind of the need and the mission we're seeing on the residential side. And then on the commercial end of things, which maybe from a affordable housing perspective, we don't often get as involved in, but you might be seeing some grocery stores that are holding on strong, but in large part, most retail, office, hotel, cultural spaces are really struggling right now. And we want to talk about kind of how to both honor and preserve some of those spaces, but also see this as an opportunity to increase housing that might serve the formerly homeless, might serve people with lower incomes that might not otherwise have access to an area. So that's kind of just wanted to acknowledge that kind of the geography of what this looks very different town by town, but the broad stroke and the broad theme that we're going to be focusing on in this pandemic is kind of looking at a weaker commercial market and using that as an opportunity for affordable housing. So the flow of this, I'll start off by sharing a little case study on 140 Clarendon, which is a development that's under construction now in Boston. We'll take just a quick moment to break it up for like 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll move to Michael, who will talk about how he's seeing the commercial market play out in Hartford and how he's thinking about the development of those spaces. We'll again give a quick pause for questions. Then we'll talk about 20 Security Drive, which is a development that Beacon is just starting to work on in Avon. And Monique will share the design perspective from that, thinking about what it means to transform a vacant commercial space and make it really appropriate and lively for a residential setting. And then we'll have questions at the end. So a couple small opportunities just to break it up for questions, but in large part, we'll probably have our conversation at the end of the session. And just to kind of frame and clarify the 2 case studies that we've chosen to kind of sandwich this discussion from the developer's perspective. They're both in 2 different areas. One's in Connecticut, one's in Massachusetts. They're slightly different building types. One will be an entirely vacant commercial building. One has existing commercial tenants. One's in pre-development. One closed 2 weeks ago and is in construction. But again, to highlight what they both have in common is they're kind of the conversion of former commercial space. And what's really important, I know that equity is kind of the overarching theme of this conference and kind of threading through a lot of the presentations. But what it does is it allows us to build in neighborhoods where in 2019 we probably wouldn't have any access to. And it's what's happening in the commercial markets that enables us to jump in and do that. So we can use this kind of opportunity as a means to expand the right to place, to just add more affordable housing in areas that have great access to jobs and employment, great quality of life. And that's what we're going to talk about. All right, so 140 Clarendon, we will dive into it. 140 Clarendon is the building you see in the top right. It was developed nearly 100 years ago by the YWCA Boston. It is in the Back Bay, which if you're not familiar with it, is one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Boston. It's near Copley Square. It's surrounded by some of the most expensive hotels in the area. It's a very, very great neighborhood of what Boston offers. So the YWCA has been operating this property for 100 years. They originally developed it as single room occupancy housing. And then at some point down the line, kind of converted it into this mixed use center. So when sort of before this transaction, the building included a lot of commercial on the early floors. It included a school, the Lyric Theater, which is very well known within Boston, a pretty key cultural institution, nonprofit offices. Viga is a local restaurant, and then it sort of had like a neighborhood local tailor. In addition, there were 118 residential apartment units on the upper floors. Those were still some single room occupancy, some studios, some 1-bedrooms. They're about 2/3 market and 2/3 affordable and 1/3 market, actually getting quite high rents in those market units. And there was a 66-key hotel. So I think it was around 2019, the WISE board kind of assessed their financial position. They decided that the best thing to do for their organization was to convert the value of this building into an endowment for the company. They put the building up for sale. In 2019, the bidder that was selected from that process was a luxury hotel developer. So that was the plan for the building going forward. Obviously, in 2020, when the pandemic happened, that deal fell through. And the YWCA was left in a really uncomfortable position because they still needed to kind of capture the value of the building. They needed to do it quickly, and they were particularly hurting because the hotel was really the largest margin, the largest revenue generator for the building. So the city and state were kind of aware of this transaction. They knew what an important building this could be. And together, Beacon sort of worked with them to work out a program that would address a huge community need. And then we went back to the YWCA, proposed this deal that would have a huge affordable housing focus, and also carried with it a promise that we would close it basically in about a year, which is extremely fast to go from acquisition of a new building with existing tenants to re-permitting to closing a financial deal. So because of basically the public support and investment, the new kind of landscape of the market, the opportunity that this was, everyone, truly the affordable housing ecosystem in Boston was really working together to push this through and get it closed over a year. So what the transaction proposed, many of the commercial tenants, pretty much all of them besides a small nonprofit who elected to leave, remained in place. So one of the community goals of this was thinking about the gentrification of commercial tenants in the Back Bay and making sure we were still creating spaces for nonprofits, still creating a space for the Lyric even after this pandemic, and preserving the school. So that the commercial space was not just a tangential goal, it was part of the plan and part of the purpose of this building. And then we basically looked at the hotel and existing apartments and said, we're going to convert as many as possible, so 210 into full apartments, only studios and 1-bedrooms, and all of them will be permanently affordable. Of those 210, all of which are supported by PBVs, 111 are leased up using the Housing First process. So they're specifically for people who were experiencing typically chronic homelessness. And the residents in those apartments receive wraparound services from Pine Street Inn, who was our service partner in the project. So Pine Street Inn is one of a very old, well-known, well-respected service provider in Boston. And then all of the residents in the building actually receive wellness services from Beacon's management company. It is a very large scale of a building with this programming. We knew that the need was going to be high for people moving in. So we have a pretty robust service budget and sort of service programming to think about, like fitness classes, computer lab programming, social activities, meals on site. All of that's kind of included in making this building function well. In order to pull this off, again, the scale of this is really huge. It's definitely the largest deal that I've ever worked on. It's a $120 million affordable housing deal that was put together in a year. So it was a really huge lift. We did this by assembling a number of financing sources that had rolling deadlines, and basically just with the willingness of the city and state to understand our timeline and to work with us. So we used 4% tax credits on this, again, kind of helpful with the scale. State low-income housing tax credits were available. We used just a huge number of soft subsidy sources, many different kinds. The city of Boston had kind of new funding sources available because of the pandemic. So we pulled in CDBG CV funds, which was one of those. We used tax-exempt debt, some additional soft subsidy from our quasi-public bank, and then every lender that was in the deal before agreed to resubordinate their debt. There was some affordable housing before, there was some subsidy before. We were able to kind of preserve that and keep it in the building. So very complicated structure, a lot of things kind of being pulled into this. Because we're talking about the impact of the pandemic, I wanted to talk about the impact on this project. We've kind of talked about the timeline and how there was greater urgency, both on kind of the mission side and in terms of what the why, what they could do in terms of timeline. They could only be so flexible in terms of when we would close and fund and pay them the acquisition price. There was some new opportunity in terms of funding something at this scale because of the new resources that were available to the city. And then for those of you on the development or financing side, you know that there was just a number of erratic financing changes over the past year in terms of interest rates. If you look at rent trends, you know, rents in downtown were super suppressed in the spring and all of 2020. Typically, they had recovered by 2021 because we were totally financed by PVVs. You know, we were doing our market studies when the rents had actually recovered and were super strong. They're capped at small area FMRs. It's just a little vignette that I find interesting. And basically, when we got to kind of finalizing our deal just a couple months before close, we learned that the 2022 FMRs were much lower than the 2021 because of the data lag in setting those rents. And we kind of had to scramble with 60 days left to pull in more subsidy to kind of rethink how the deal was functioning. So putting deals together in this pandemic is a little crazy. We had to kind of change our course many times within the year, but being flexible and kind of quickly pivoting was really helpful. What all this subsidy and funding and programming was able to do, in addition to the overall programming, which was the primary goal, there was also a huge investment in terms of preserving the exterior of the historic building, creating new common spaces for the service programming that we talked about and needed, for resident lounges, for kitchens, fitness centers, spaces for wellness nurses, spaces for caseworkers, that type of thing. There was new elevators, new MEP systems. The big thing was kind of thinking about how SRO units are really kind of a safety challenge during the pandemic. So we did not want to include them in the property, and thinking about how to convert hotel rooms and SROs into at least a small studio. So every unit has its own kitchen and kitchenette. I guess it's worth mentioning, this is one of the first projects that we knew about the pandemic when we were conceptualizing it. So we were able to kind of build in a lot of sort of tweaks and changes related to that, in terms of how our construction schedule was formatted and what we knew about how the construction would happen, what we knew about how relocation would need to happen. We knew that internet was super important, so we put it in the whole building. We thought about airflow when we were thinking about MEP systems. The theater installed a new HVAC system, kind of knowing about how important air filtration would be. So those are just a few examples of how we thought about the pandemic in terms of actually developing the scope. And I think that's an overview of a very large project. If you want to take one or two questions while the programming is still fresh in your mind, I kind of did a high level scope and financing. Feel free to ask about anything. I'll volunteer that I know far more about the financing than I do about the design and construction, but I will do my best with your questions. So if we can have, if there's one or two questions, you can type them in the chat. I will, and I apologize for not reading the chat as I was presenting. All right, are all the units studios to 2 bedrooms? All the units are currently studios and 1 bedrooms after the transaction. So we wanted to kind of balance the giving everyone their private space, but also knowing that to actually have a strong community, we wanted to be drawing people out into the wellness spaces as well. So the design tried to accommodate a balance of that. Any questions at this moment?
April, there's a request to go back to the slide before this one.
Oh, before scope, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of age range, there's no age restriction. It is all PVVs, so everyone at some point goes through the BHA's waiting list, but there was a lot of work between our team and the Pine Street Inn and the city's kind of continuum of care service providers and that kind of pipeline to think about how to structure the lease up and the kind of vetting of tenants to be housing first. The concept of housing first being that you want to keep it as a pretty low bar because it's most important to get someone stably housed before asking them to meet any of these other qualifications. Thanks, Carol. All right, so I'll give you time. We'll have time at the end to talk more if you want. But otherwise, I will keep it going, and we'll let Mike talk about kind of more of the Connecticut lens and how we're seeing this play out on a city level.
Thank you, April. First of all, we've been in the business of converting underutilized buildings for about 7 or 8 years now. So the impact of the pandemic is one that, while it went deeper and in areas we didn't expect, it's the net result of trying to find a reuse for some of these older facilities has been sort of our unofficial mission statement for the last few years. Our activity has been not only in converting basically lower class, B class office properties, but we've also been converting industrial properties and more recently hotel properties. As you're all pretty aware, the pandemic kind of hit different industries in different ways, and even within them, like the hotel business, depending on what a hotel was, what type of hotel, it got hit worse than others. A luxury hotel on the beach in Miami is doing a lot different than a business hotel in the middle of a city. And likewise, everything in between. A highway ramp hotel is going to be a different character, and what happened to it and what is going to happen to it. But it's not just unique to the Hartfords of the world. We're seeing the Marriotts in Farmington converting to residential. The Holiday Inn in Bridgeport is converting to residential. And we've been actually confronting how best to go forward with some of the older hotels in downtown Hartford. In this slide here, you just to the left of the boat building, a small white building, is the former Sonesta Hotel. It was actually empty for nearly 20 years. It became really abandoned, derelict, broken into repeatedly, continuous source of crime on Constitution Plaza. And we went about the business a few years ago of converting it to market rate housing. What was unique and what has proved out to be a pattern is that the conversion of old hotels into residential is relatively inexpensive to other types of conversions, primarily because your plumbing systems, your heating systems, your room layouts lend themselves very quickly to a residential conversion format. Combining units where one has a bathroom allows the other one with a bathroom to be converted to a kitchen, and allows you to expand into 1-bedroom units. And in the case of the Sonesta, we broke a pattern on what we were spending on a per unit basis and actually delivered the property somewhere around 1/2 on a per unit cost basis than we were seeing in other buildings downtown. The conversion of buildings, one has to be mindful of where one starts off. If you're a developer, your interests are often very different than if you're a planner. We kind of straddle those worlds here at CRDA. From one perspective, we look at the deals as one-off. We try to understand the best use of them, try to get at the math of them and see how we can sustain value and move them into a next generation of use. From a planner's perspective, you got to be careful what properties you're signing off on. I caution everybody right now to be careful what the future is with your commercial properties. While vacancies are up, no one really has a crystal ball where these properties are going. And from a planner's perspective, you may wish you had your commercial space again in 4 or 5 years. So when you look at properties for potential conversion, ones that have been impacted by COVID, first appreciate where they are in their industrial niche. A B building, a B office building or something lower is probably a good candidate for conversion. An A building, I would caution against it unless the A building has a very high vacancy rate. I mean, something greater than 25 or 30%. If it's 25 or 30%, it's better to ride the storm a little while until we really know where it's all headed. Obviously, mixing the uses in the buildings may be a better strategy than outright conversions. We're finding that buildings that have a mixed use, residential and hotel in some cases, or residential and commercial, allows the property owner to play multiple markets to diversify his risk and to actually get greater efficiencies out of the building systems. The rents obviously come in a little bit better because the amenity packages services different clienteles, and we're able to kind of push the envelope on mixed-use properties far better than we can on single-use properties. So if you're a planner in a municipal structure and you're being bombarded with what to do with these properties that took it on the chin during COVID, really got to be cautious as to where you go, because the property owner is going to chase the easiest and most beneficial outcome, and that may well be a residential conversion at this point. Looking at residential conversions, in particular hotel conversions, we're in the midst of several. I'm not sure if you can move the slides for me, April, but the properties that, I guess we've got one slide, I'm not sure what happened there. Was there others? I think there were several that were sent.
Yes, sorry. I believe we just have the one slide for this.
Just have this one?
Yes.
I'm sorry, not sure what happened. Anyway, we have been wrestling 4 different hotels in various stages. The Sonesta, which is now known as the Spectra on the left there, the small white one. But we also went about 2 years ago and we converted a former Radisson to 50-50. It was 50% conversion of the upper 18 floors or so. I'm sorry, upper 8 floors of an 18-story building into 96 residential units. A new owner has come along and purchased the property and is now working to convert the lower half of the building so it'll be entirely residential going forward. We're also looking at the Homewood Suites. The Homewood Suites closed during the pandemic. Basically just went flatline on its occupancies. It was, in its history, the former Bond Hotel. So the conversion back in this case is a relatively painless one. Where the units were extended stay, they were, for all intent and purposes, functioning like 1-bedroom units, already furnished. So the conversion of that property is one of dealing with amenities and security systems, as well as the things a hotel would not need, like a laundry per se for the individual tenants, other amenities for individual tenants, exclusive security zones, parking arrangements, and the like. Were a little bit different for the permanent resident than they are for a hotel use. But the actual amenity package and the historic preservation of the old facade is the challenge that we're confronting today. And then ultimately, we're looking at the former Hilton, actually the existing Hilton, in downtown Hartford. It too saw its occupancy collapse and has been a very torturous process bringing it back online. The investors have pretty much gotten to the point where they're not going to put any more funds into it, and we're about to run out of PPP money. So the conversion of the Hilton into some other residential / hotel use is most likely in our future, and we're currently wrestling various pro formas on this. In each case, we look at the capital stack, trying to tease out as much private funds as we can, whether it's conventional financing or equities. And then we cobble together, in some cases, chattel credits, 4% credits, in some cases, historic preservation credits. We've tapped into low energy credits as well. And then we bring CRDA to the table as the gap filler, and we try to make our numbers work so that everybody else can get their returns they need on the respective investments. So we look for buildings that are the likeliest and the best to convert, not necessarily the one the developers want to convert. In the case of the hotels, we have found them to be the relatively least expensive conversion candidates, though the capital stacks can be trying. We think mixed uses are doing better and will do better long-term than a continuous single use. And it really has to, you really have to analyze every individual building and its long-term play in its respective market. The industrial conversions that we have done have been even more of a challenge. You get more into environmentals in that and a lot more design type issues to hammer in the right type of units, the right locations. For the most part, we're finding these units to be small. Most are studio and efficiencies, micro units, ranging anywhere from 400 square feet to maybe 600 and change. We get up into 700-800 square foot when we get into the 1-bedroom structures. And beyond that, the 2 bedrooms and the 3 bedrooms, we really aren't finding a market, though the 2 bedrooms seem to go up and down a little bit more than others. So we have been playing around with the conversion of properties, regardless of COVID. COVID has kind of brought it home and focused us more on the hotel real estate. We do have vacancies that are disconcerting in the office market, but again, we're cautious trying to define that building, its role long term. And I would just say to all your planners out there, reserve judgment before going too quick on your commercial properties, especially if they're in the higher classes. So yeah, that's a quick summary. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. The portfolio, again, we're not an affordable housing agency per se, but the rents are often quote unquote affordable. They're just not restricted. They would appeal to an affordable price point, anywhere from probably 60 to 120% SMSA, average median incomes. Much more than that, some units will demand more. They're generally the higher amenity, higher price buildings with in other locations at a downtown core. But the conversions of the hotels and some of the B buildings have been primarily at a price point that would appear as affordable, if not restricted. Not restricting them allows the properties to appreciate, which allows us to attract additional private investment, which is the kind of balance we're trying to keep. Notwithstanding that, many of the capital stacks bring affordable housing programs to them, such as the bonuses that come with the state historic preservation credits. And we'll set aside on a relatively routine basis 20% of the units as restricted. And then again, that's driven by the funding sources more than us. But it turns out the portfolio is roughly coming into that kind of a balance. So I apologize for whatever slides disappeared in the ether, but I'd be happy to follow up with anybody if they were more interested.
I think there was a question around properties outside of Hartford County, but Mike, your organization, is it solely focused on Hartford?
Yeah, we're focused primarily on downtown Hartford. About 5 years ago, we were expanded in our mission to the entire city, but we statutorily can operate in the greater Hartford region, the 8 towns that make it up. Again, for purposes of statute, it's the 7 towns that physically abut, share a border with Hartford, plus Hartford are our region. We're looking at housing deals right now in East Hartford. We completed one in Wethersfield a few years ago. We're currently looking at one in Bloomfield. And we did some site prep, environmental cleanup, where there is some residential being planned anyway in Newington. So we can't operate outside of it. But we're mindful of the region. Farmington is in the greater region, though not in our region, and they got a hotel conversion into residential. So we're seeing it possibly in Rocky Hill as well. There's some talk of it in another hotel in the East Hartford area. So it's not unique to Hartford, and it's really, when you get down to the hotel conversions, we're finding it really a function of the age of the property more than anything. And that's, again, another one of those early indicators if you got an issue or not is take a look at the age of the property. If it goes back anytime before 85 or 90, a good chance that building wants to be converted. So.
Great, thank you for kind of summarizing the overall kind of general approach and things to think through. All right. Again, we'll let that simmer for a little bit and we can come back for questions at the end. And my apologies, Mike, for the communication breakdown around the slides. Thank you for going without the slide support. And I will pass it on to Gina, who's going to discuss our project, the homes at Avon Park. Gina, you are on mute.
Thank you. So the homes at Avon Park, I think it's a convergence of a few conditions that create a terrific development opportunity in the town of Avon, Connecticut, which is a high opportunity area. It's a really beautiful, well-heeled community where you would be hard pressed to find a feasible site to create an affordable community of any scale, but we were fortunate to have done just that. We thought it would be interesting to focus on some of the design challenges, particularly in the site. But I just want to briefly tee this up for you so you have sort of the overview of what we're proposing to do before I hand it off to Monique. So if we go back to the site plan, April, thank you. It's a site that is essentially located at the center of town. We're just separated from the center of town by Route 44. The site is up on a hill and surrounded by trees, and its access, the access to the center of town is really just separated by Route 44, but we are right next to a pedestrian and bike pathway that connects with a tunnel underneath Route 44, and that helps to create connection with the center of town. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. The site was developed in the early 70s as an office park with an office building, which is what you're looking at. Yep. And also office parking. The property was developed for use by an insurance company, which left and sold the property in about 2009. And the property has since been occupied by a charter school, which is going to follow through on a plan to relocate to a nearby community early next year. So the property was not really functioning so much as an office building already, and COVID has pretty much sealed that fate. But we see an opportunity here to repurpose what we feel is otherwise really a handsome building with these sort of strong horizontal lines. And again, if we could go back to the site map, April, for a second, it's located near the town center and municipal offices. You see the, yep, town clerk and town amenities in the center there. And that includes a new commercial development that's under construction. And that area there, while in this photo is showing nothing, that development is well underway, and a Whole Foods supermarket has already opened there. So as I mentioned before, we are right across from that. If you look at that pedestrian tunnel, that's a light outline by April's arrow there, and it goes, oh, yep, I see there. Yep, close, getting warmer. There you go, right there. That's a tunnel and path that goes underneath Route 44 and connects us, our site, to the town center there. There are improvements that are already underway to this tunnel, and we'll be supporting that effort. So lots of opportunity here to enliven and connect to the center. But really the challenge is to take this office park and create a viable residential community, and not just a residential community, but one that's affordable. We're going through the zoning process currently, and we're hearing from people who grew up in Avon, people who are working in Avon, talking about really having few affordable housing options in the town. So what are we doing to remedy this? So our proposal involves the creation of a mixed income multifamily rental community in 2 phases. The first phase would involve the adaptive reuse of the existing office building that we showed you that would consist of about 76 apartment homes. We're proposing 1 and 2 bedroom units there, with a second phase to follow on the large surface parking that immediately abuts the existing office building. We put a new building there for another 100 units or so. Our plan is to serve a wide variety of household incomes, from 30 to 80% AMI, and then have about 20% market rate housing there. So, as I mentioned, we thought it would be interesting to tell you a little bit about how we've been approaching the design here. And the next slide actually shows you the buildings. The buildings in the background show the existing office building. That's right. And then to the right would be a newly constructed building that we would design to work with the existing office building. But you also see a significant amount of site work here in order to make this really feel like a residential community. And so with that, I want to hand it off to Monique, who's a critical part of our team and done a tremendous amount of work to create communities, community feel and amenities here. Hand it off to you, Monique.
Thanks very much, Gina. So we can go to the next slide. I just want to say I'm so grateful to be here today. I've been working with Beacon Communities for well over 10 years, and it's always a pleasure to get to work on another affordable housing development. I think one of the things that Beacon does that's really, really nice is that they're really concerned about the well-being of the people that are going in. So it's not just about building housing that's affordable. It's also about making sure that we're building communities that can be sustained over a long period of time and also contribute to the health and well-being of the individuals. So at 120 Clarendon, we saw the supportive housing being supported by wellness programs, by having care centers, by having internet access throughout. Just providing these equitable amenities is so meaningful for building communities. We're not just building structures. So for this particular development, we're looking at taking an existing office building that has some pretty amazing architecture, and the architects came up with some pretty amazing architecture to complement what's already existing. This office space has been a number of things. Most recently, it was also a school, so we do see a nice playground that's on site that will be incorporated into the design. Next slide. But we really also have to think about the site and what's on the site that can be utilized that will further strengthen the community, further create more opportunities for neighbors to get to know each other, but also provide access into the adjacent neighborhood town fabric. So as Gina had mentioned earlier, the site is located on a hill. We did, obviously create the necessary sidewalk connections. So from the existing building, it's about a 9-minute walk down the street to connect to existing sidewalks. And then that gets us to Darling Drive, which is the connection that is the tunnel underneath Route 44. So it's not a bad walk. It's about 15 minutes total if you want to go to Avon Town Village Center, which is where the new Whole Foods and new retail shops are being developed. And then it's also maybe a 15-minute walk if you want to go to the existing Avon Town offices. Next slide. We also, just because of the topography, we couldn't create an accessible sidewalk kind of going down the hill, but we were able to do a trail connection. So we have steeper slopes. This will be more like a natural trail. There's an existing golf cart path that we were able to reuse. So now we have a 5-minute walk to either destination, which now gives us a 10-minute connection down to Avon Village Center for groceries or to the town offices. Next slide. As a central organizing element, we did a multi-use lawn. We thought it'd be nice to frame both sides of the lawn with an alley of specimen trees. So that's kind of like the main multi-use space between the existing building and the new building. So flanking on both sides of the trees, we are planning a series of outdoor grills, some picnic tables. So the thinking here is you could have programmed events, you could have yoga, you could have exercise, or you could just come out with your family, have a little barbecue, a little grill. Directly adjacent to the multi-use lawn is the existing playground, and then between the playground and the new building, we have a series of amenity spaces, which include, you can go forward one, community gardens. We have pollinator gardens in support of the community gardens, and there's opportunities to expand these areas if the residents really take part in this. We've seen this successful in many communities around the Boston area, and I think with the rise of COVID, they've been very successful at communities in other regions as well. Next slide. For more active opportunities, we're planning a basketball court adjacent one of the existing parking areas, and then there's two separate dog areas, a larger one just to let the dogs off the leash, and a smaller one at the existing building. So there's opportunity for owners to have pets, and opportunities for the pets to socialize with other pets as well. And then finally, these are the spaces that really encourage getting to know each other's neighbors. We have a series of outdoor grills, not just at the main lawn, but adjacent each of the buildings. The shape of the new building is a U-shaped building, which allows us to do a really nice courtyard. Interior to that courtyard, we can do grills, we can do fire tables, we can do lounge seating, just a whole variety of spaces for neighbors to get to know each other. So all of these site elements work together, trying to create a sense of community, not just housing. And that's what I love so much about Beacon Communities. And that concludes my portion of this presentation.
Cool, thanks, Monique. So in theory, throughout this whole presentation, we dived a little bit into an existing project and what it took to put it together. We looked at kind of the public perspective and how to take a step back and looking at a whole community and what this might mean. And then we talked about this new project in Connecticut and what it means to look at what was commercial and then making it appropriate and sort of encouraging of strong residential connections and a great quality of life. So wanted to pause. We have about 5 minutes left. If you have any questions, particularly about the project that Monique and Gina just discussed, we would love to.
I see Pamela Joy is making the observation that the units seem to be potentially targeted for town employees and employees of nearby businesses, and that is absolutely true. That is definitely something that we have kept in mind as we've been putting the transaction together, is that there's an opportunity here to provide housing for working households. We have that new retail development that is going up, and we definitely want to reach out to those businesses and let them know that we could potentially house their employees. And looking at someone asked, here we go, whether the project includes affordable units. Yes, currently our plan is to have 80% of the units be affordable. So as I mentioned earlier, we hope to provide housing to a range of households from 30 through 80% of area median income. Let's see. And Catherine makes the observation that the design looks like housing she's been seeing going up in Greater Dallas area over the past 20 years or so. Texas seems to be booming with new housing, new influx of people for sure. So there's tons of development going on there. Any other questions?
Any other questions, or we can give you guys 5 minutes of a Zoom break before your next session. Chelsea, do you want to hop in and say anything to wrap it up, or we can?
Chelsea left. Hi, everyone. I'm Exxon from PSC. So Chelsea's on the next session already. So if everybody's all set, the next session is the legislative roundtable. So I'd recommend everyone check it out. And thank you, everyone, for your comments and conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.